Welcome to Words on the Outside with Laura Bynum.
Today's reading is contributed by author Melissa Lummis, whose luminaries include Stephen King, Angela Knight, and Laurel K. Hamilton. She reads from a closing chapter in her first novel, Enlightened, a New Age suspense with elements of romance and fantasy.
Dalal sat propped up on his meditation pallet, a blissful smile on his face as Wolf and Lodi entered his home. Callisto took Lodi's hands in his, raising them to his face and kissing her knuckles. Marguerite, guided, and the guru's closest sannyasin, dressed in orange garb, sat around the room. He was wrapped in a white blanket, his hands fluttering eagerly for them to approach. "Wolf, my friend, so good to see you." He didn't sound the least bit sick or weak. "Dal," Wolf said, and hugged him, kissed both his cheeks. Dal patted his arms. "You have been my good friend, and I thank you for bringing this light into our lives." His wide hand reached out and gripped Lodi's arm, pulling her close. His long beard and mustache tickled as he smacked wet kisses on her face. "Good girl." And he grinned, squeezing her arms, his nose just inches from her face. "You trusted yourself." Lodi blinked in surprise. I don't know what you mean." He smiled and nodded, his moist eyes bright. "Easier to do once you know who you are, His head tilted, and Lodi burst out laughing. His mischievous smile spread to his laughing eyes, and the monks murmured and chuckled. But Da'al flapped a hand at them. "Shh!" And he winked at Lodi. "You must watch this with your special eyes." He patted her arm. "Maybe you will let Wolf see as well, huh?" She couldn't stop the giggles. She winked back at him as Wolf sat down on the edge of the padded pallet, rubbing her back. "We've seen a lot together, haven't we, friend?" Wolf contemplated the sash of flowers around Da'al's neck. White and pink petals were scattered around the pallet and in his lap. Red talc was smeared on his forehead, and yellow and white ash around his beard. "You know what my favorite day with you was?" Da'al held Lodi's hand, but was talking to Wolf. Wolf smiled before he even looked up. What? But he knew. "August 15th, 1969. You remember. I said the prayer." And they grinned at each other. They laughed the way old friends do, and Callisto joined in, sitting down on the other side, but the smile on his face was touched with sadness. "I don't want to lose you," Callisto sighed. "Ah, Callisto." Dal pouted his hand and picked up a handkerchief from his lap. "You see this hanky?" He held it up by two corners so it sagged into a triangle. See hanky?" "Nothing else, just hanky, yes?" Callisto grinned at Dal, and Dal tied two of the corners into a knot. "Now, tell me what this is." "It's a hanky with a knot," Callisto said. Dal laughed. Yes, now, and he untied the knot. "What is it now?" "A hanky without a knot?" "Just a hanky, yes?" He tied the knot again. "Knot." And held it up. "Now, watch carefully and tell me which direction the knot goes." He slid the knot apart and held the hanky back up. "Where did it go?" He chuckled. "Huh! And where from it came?" He held the hanky up for a long moment, smiling kindly at Callisto. Then he lowered it and began tying it again. "That is death and life. Knot was born." He finished tying another knot and immediately started untying it. "And the knot was dead. But before the knot, hanky was." And he laughed, and everyone else couldn't help but laugh with him. "And after the knot, hanky is." Holding the untied hanky aloft, he chuckled some more, smiling his great love around the room. Lodi laid a hand on her throat. Was it sadness veiled with happiness she felt, or was it the other way around? "That is the secret of death, Callisto. We don't really lose anything." He blew his nose with a honk into the hanky and balled it up in his lap. Patting Lodi's cheek, he said, "Now you watch, She nodded as Wolf took her hand and lowered her down next to him. Marguerite and Guided took their turns exchanging hugs and words with Gurudev. And then he sank deeper into the cushions and turned his eyes to a wrinkled woman in one of the chairs. She stood up, her long braid hanging down the back of her orange kurta, and she handed out shawls to everyone with deliberate movements, wrapping one around her head as if demonstrating. Lodi and the others did the same. She stood with a humble bow, closed her eyes, and pressed her hands together in prayer. In a shrill, high voice, she broke the stillness, singing the mantra, Om Mani Padme Om, drawing it long and sweet. She repeated it several times, and then a deep male voice joined her. One by one, everyone added their voices. Lodi had always had trouble understanding what it meant. A monk once told her it had no simple translation, that all the teachings of the Buddha were summed up in its 6 syllables. But the best anyone had come up with was, the jewel is in the lotus, or praise to the jewel in the lotus. But that didn't matter. It was the saying of it. It was the singing of the sounds that was important. And as they sang, she thought of all the suffering they had been through, that her new friends had endured, and the death of her husband. But the sadness didn't choke her anymore. She glanced at Wolf, who slipped an arm around her. And what was the cause of all their suffering? Was it Midore? Was it Patrick? And was there ever a way to avoid it? She had no simple answers. What she did have was a deep and abiding love for them all. For Wolf, yes, but for Callisto and Marguerite, and even Fiamet. Maybe that's the answer. Compassion, she thought. What else was there to ease or even end suffering but kindness, random and purposeful acts to bring light into everyone's life? There was quite enough hate and greed and anger in the world, she was sure. The least she could do was release some love into the fray. Her peace offering, a floating, flickering emissary of hope on a sea of suffering. Dal eased his entire body into the pillows, his hands losing their deliberateness, surrendering in his lap. He sang Om with long, soft exhales, and the light in the room flowed with their voices, colors merged and separated within them so the boundaries were hard to find. Lodi reached deep into Wolf's prana until they were like one being, and he saw through her eyes and she felt with his heart. And their heartbeats slowed, their breathing so subtle it was like the air wandered in and out of their lungs with no effort. Together they watched the light lose the distinction of separate beings until a clear white light engulfed them all. And Da'al's light was the light in the room. Bliss and gratitude seeped out of every eye, and the light grew bright until it flared wide, then suddenly faded, and the room returned to a peaceful flow of prana. Feeling less contained, more apart, Lodi touched Da'al's still hand and wrapped her fingers around it. He's gone, she whispered.